As part of a nationwide federal courts expansion program, the General Services Administration plans to build a new district courthouse in Salt Lake City to accommodate the expanding spatial needs of the District Court of Utah. This new courthouse will be on the same block as the Frank E. Moss Courthouse in one of Salt Lake City's historic districts. What makes this project unique is the extraordinary site preparations GSA undertook, including the relocation of the historic Oddfellows Hall. Every phase of the relocation was documented, making this one of GSA's first projects to become a YouTube sensation. The Independent Order of the Oddfellows originated in 18th century Great Britain as the Oddfellows, organized as a fraternal benevolent association by tradesmen of different guilds during the Industrial Revolution. In an era when the financial and social consequences of illness or death could be disastrous, the Oddfellows offered members and their families security by establishing fraternal insurance programs. In 1819, 5 members of the order from England established a lodge in Maryland, founding the U.S. Oddfellows, chartered by their English parent organization as the first independent order. In Utah, the development of the organization coincided with the growth of the territory's non-Mormon population, as the arrival of the Transcontinental Railroad and mining offered opportunities for immigrant workers and fortune seekers in the late 19th century. Selling 4,000 shares at $100 each, the order raised $40,000 to buy the lot at the Post Office Place and build a richly detailed brick and stone meeting hall. Architect George F. Kosturzian enriched the facade with generous arched windows, elaborate corbelled brick, stone bands, decorative turrets, and colonnettes. Contractor J.H. Bowen completed the building in 1891.
The Oddfellows building is important both architecturally and historically. Architecturally, it's important as a rare example of Romanesque revival architecture. And historically, it's important as it anchored South Main Street as home to a fraternal organization. Whereas the north end of Main Street was home to the Mormon population with Temple Square, the south end of Main Street evolved as a home to the Gentile population, which was centered on non-Mormons and the social organizations that they participated in.
The Oddfellows building has been around for a long, long time and has always been one of those icon buildings in Salt Lake City. A building that everybody knew, everyone had association with it. My father, for instance, was drafted and took his physical in the basement of the Oddfellows Hall.
After World War II, shrinking membership in the Salt Lake City Order mirrored the decline of the organization nationwide as New Deal programs created state responsibility for social welfare and security. After the Oddfellows moved out in 1976, the building found new uses as a restaurant and offices. The building was listed in the National Register of Historic Places on August 10, 1978.
It is also on Salt Lake City's landmarks list of historic buildings. It is part of the Exchange Place National Register Historic District, and this was the part of town where the non-Mormon population was creating their own financial district.
Preserving it, preserving that piece of Salt Lake City history and the fabric of our city is really important because it's our older buildings, it's our historic qualities more than anything else that give Salt Lake City, like almost any city, a lot of its character. Preserving Oddfellows Hall is important for us.
The Frank E. Moss U.S. Courthouse, built between 1903 and 1906 and expanded in 1912 and again in 1932, originally served as a courthouse and main post office. Designed by architect James Knox Taylor, it is the oldest building in Salt Lake City's Exchange Place Historic District. Plans to expand the courthouse began when the court submitted a formal request for an annex to the General Services Administration in 1992. While their growing caseload pointed to a need for additional space, the courts remained committed to their historic courthouse and downtown location. Rather than add on to the Moss Courthouse, GSA and the courts decided to construct a freestanding courthouse to accommodate courts' spatial, security, and technical needs.
We need a new building for a number of reasons. We need additional courtrooms, and we don't have any place in this building to put them. Salt Lake City has a growing population. We will need more courtrooms in the future, and the only way we can accommodate them is to build a new building.
Interior spaces in the historic Moss Courthouse will be preserved and rehabilitated for the U.S. bankruptcy courts, who do not need the separate circulation required by the criminal courts. Historic courtrooms will be restored and remain in use. The historic courthouse will also be structurally upgraded for improved earthquake resistance. The district courts will relocate to the new courthouse building designed by Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners in association with Naylor Wentworth Lund Architects. The new courthouse will house 14 state-of-the-art, secure courtrooms, judges' chambers, and a library. Construction of the new building is slated for 2010 and is estimated to take 3 years to complete. GSA solicited the public's input through the planning process. Responding to community concerns about demolishing the Oddfellows Hall to make way for the courthouse annex, GSA decided to preserve the Oddfellows Hall by relocating it and building the courthouse expansion on the remainder of the block west of the Moss Courthouse.
There was actually a time when the Oddfellow Hall was going to be incorporated into the addition. It turned out, based on our design team's efforts, that that was not practical. So the GSA and historical communities got together and decided to move the building instead.
The idea to move the building was really an agreement between many parties that were involved in discussions with the federal courthouse expansion. And it was done with the public's interest and participation, and it wasn't just done in a back meeting room. So we're very pleased that this has been an outcome with public's participation and interest.
Using the consultation process established under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, GSA worked with the state and city government's preservation advocacy groups, area businesses, and residents in the surrounding community to resolve the project's preservation challenges.
It's part of the 106 negotiation. It does require federal agencies to look at what resources they're impacting, so they know what they're doing, and then to look at alternatives. And part of that law requires that they get public input and input from interested parties. And the interested parties in this case include the Utah Heritage Foundation, Salt Lake City Corporation, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
In early 2004, an agreement between GSA, the Utah State Historic Preservation Office, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation was reached. In addition to rehabilitating the Moss Courthouse, GSA agreed to relocate the Oddfellows Hall and design a compatible courthouse annex. The Utah Heritage Foundation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation were consulting parties to the agreement.
Moving this building is something that a private sector developer would not do. It just wouldn't make dollars and cents for that developer to do that because the costs associated with it just wouldn't balance out for them. But because we're the federal government and we do things that private sector developers wouldn't normally do because of laws that are in place and because we try to do the right thing. So we're not always just looking at the bottom line, we're looking at preserving historic resources in the communities that we go into.
Citing heightened security requirements, in late 2004, Congress passed a public law mandating design changes to the annex and directing GSA to acquire and demolish the nearby Shubrick Hotel. Designed by John C. Craig, the hotel was built in 1912 and determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. Many local residents were upset that the Shubrick would not be preserved. One of the city's few remaining historic hotels, the Shubrick was also home to Salt Lake City's largest private nightclub, the Port of Call. However, the 2004 legislation did not allow Section 106 consultation or consideration of alternatives, and moving a second historic building was just not possible. Amid the mixed press and controversy, saving the Oddfellows Hall remained the community's highest priority.
Fortunately, from my perspective in Salt Lake City, We value our historic structures, we value our heritage as a whole,